Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Back to the Office series, discussions of best practices surrounding returning to an office or lab-based work environment. Our first episode features the perspective of leading bioscience companies, featuring Gitte Pedersen of Genomic Expressions, Prem Premsrirut of Mirimus, Amy Sheehan of IVERIC Bio, and Regina Donahue of Intra-Cellular Therapies. The panel is moderated by Nicole Riley of Goodwin. Here is episode 1 of NewYorkBIO's Back to the Office series.
We're being recorded.
Oh.
And it's different in different parts of the country because you have the situation where, in some parts of the country, it's easy, right? You get in your car at your house, you drive to your building, you can walk in your building and you can shut your door and to your own individual office. That is not how life sciences in New York City is generally arranged. And if you have that situation, I want to come work in your office. So today we have Nicole Riley from Goodwin, who is going to moderate a discussion with our all-star panel of life science R&D companies. We're thrilled you're here with us. I will turn it over to Nicole. Oh, but one housekeeping matter. If you have questions for our panel, please use the chat or the Q&A box, and we will, Nicole will lob them in as the conversation continues. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jennifer. So I did want to give the folks on the panel a quick chance to introduce themselves, just a bit of a bio. And so I have the fortune of being able to do this as it pops up on my screen. So Amy, do we want to start with you?
So hi, everybody. I'm Amy Sheehan. I work at a company called IVERIC Bio. I'm the Senior Vice President of HR there. IVERIC Bio is a biotechnology company based in New York City. We also have 2 small offices in New Jersey as well. We are focused on retinal disease. We have a phase 3 trial going on right now in geographic atrophy, and we have some earlier stage programs in gene therapy. So we're very busy. We're about 70 employees or so, with about 30 full-time contractors, and we're continuing to grow. So happy to be here.
Perfect. So Prem, you're next in my boxes.
Hi, I'm Prem. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Mirimus. We are a biotech company based off of RNA interference and CRISPR genetic engineering. As COVID hit and we're located right here in the heart of Brooklyn, we really took to action and started creating a high throughput platform for testing. So we scaled up. We're about over 100 employees right now in the Brooklyn area. Not many people privileged to work from home. So we've been full-time really in the office throughout the entire pandemic and scaling up through all of this. So as the landscape changes, so will what we do moving forward, but that is our current progress right now. And we're just continuing to develop saliva-based screening tests for future applications.
Perfect. Regina, you are next on the list.
My name is Regina Donahue. I am the Vice President and Head of Human Resources for Intra-Cellular Therapies. We are located on the east side in the Alexandria Science Center. We have close to 400 employees. Just under a quarter of them are in New York City, and the rest of our employees are remote or field-based. So we had the unique challenge of needing to get our core base of lab employees back to the office last summer, as well as the challenge of getting our folks back out into the field. We launched our first product last March in the midst of the pandemic, so that was a huge challenge for us. And we're in the CNS space. We have a product for schizophrenia, and we are waiting on approval, hopeful, for an indication for bipolar.
Wow. Perfect. Regina, that's tough. But Ben, here next at launching any products.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben Van de Graf. I'm head of operations and people at Kallyope. We're actually based just a few floors above Regina's company at the Alexandria Center. Kallyope, we're about a 75-person company, also growing like everyone else here, focusing on the gut-brain axis and developing gut-restricted therapies to target the gut-brain axis and to treat disease throughout the body. As of late last year, we actually became a clinical stage company and now have 2 programs in the clinic. And I guess I'll just add, and with all of our employees are based at the Alexandria Center. And most, like Prem's company, have been coming to work for a long time, and very few work from home.
So last but not least, Gitte.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present Genomic Expression. I'm the CEO and co-founder, and we are an RNA platform company because by analyzing RNA, and most people don't know, but COVID is an RNA virus, we can detect disease, monitor health, and design next generation cures. So similar to Prem's story, we pivoted during COVID into COVID testing, got CLIA certified, built back-end informatics, got into the semifinals of the X Prize. It was a bit messy, quite frankly. And in all that process, we grew. We made a decision very early on that we have a lot of bioinformatics going on. They didn't need to be in the office. Everybody that does wet lab stuff needs to be in the office. So we part of an incubator. There was definitely a number of measures there in terms of screening, and we offered COVID testing to everybody in our lab.
Perfect. That was super helpful. So the one thing I will say about all of the companies when I was doing research for this panel is it's shocking how much you all have grown during the last 15 months. So it's a pleasure to have you all on this panel because you certainly have a lot of experience about growing companies in the middle of all of this. Regina in particular had a hashtag hiring frame on her LinkedIn profile picture. So that's how significant the growth has been lately. So I know that a big part of this is looking forward and sort of best practices as you come back to the office, but the reality is many of you have been in the office. So I'm curious, as sort of a first question, what has been over the last 15 months your most necessary or successful best practices that you've dealt with? And so we'll do this as a bit of a round robin. And Amy, I'll start with you on this one as well.
Sure. So my company is probably a little bit different than everybody else on the panel because we are actually still remote and we've not gone back into the office. We're a development stage company, so we have labs as of right now, although that is going to be changing. But so we haven't necessarily had a need to go into the office. We are doing our first on-site event next week, so I'll let you know how that goes. But in any event, so I can give you sort of my perspective of things we've done that have really worked around engagement while remote, but we haven't really implemented things for going back to the office. So for us, almost immediately, one of the things that we did was we implemented a weekly town hall meeting with all of the employees. Prior to that, we were doing them quarterly. And I think it made a huge difference, especially given that we hired over 50% of our workforce during this pandemic. So we've never actually met most of those people in person. And
wow.
The topics, I know it's been kind of hard, but what I found is that I think we even just having the touch point weekly, sometimes we don't have a lot to say. Sometimes we have an internal speaker. Sometimes we have an external speaker. We've done things. We've had remote work consultants come. We did something on burnout. And then we've also had departmental updates. So the topics have all ranged. And I think just having sort of the CEO there, giving a message at the beginning, and then doing something together as a team has been really helpful. And feedback that we've gotten from the new hires is, please don't stop this. You know, some of the people who've been longer and know each other said, we don't need to do this every week, but we've committed that we're going to continue to do that because the new hires particularly have really liked it. The other things that we've done is, as an executive leadership team, we implemented check-ins on Monday and Friday, which we weren't doing before because everybody was in the office. And those have actually, in my opinion, and to my surprise, I think doing some of these things has actually increased our engagement and increased our communication, which I would have guessed, I think, at the onset of the pandemic. But you know, we're on a very regular basis and, you know, giving updates and communicating, which has been great. We also implemented a virtual onboarding program. So we do our entire orientation with new hires virtually. We created a video on how best practices around remote work. We used an outside consultant and we share that video with all the new in. And that's been really helpful. We still, when we were in the office, we were doing lunch with the CEO for our new hires. We're still doing that virtually. We send out, meal cards to them ahead of time and, make sure that everybody's on video, and we continue to do that as well. So those are just some of the things that we've done that I think have really worked. We've also done at least 5 surveys with employees while we've been out, different types of engagement surveys, just to monitor how they're feeling, how they feel about coming back in, what's going on with them sort of personally. And we've tried to alter some of our practices around that, whether that's been outside speakers or giving, more time off. We've changed a couple of policies like vacation and carryover and things like that, just to be able to accommodate the differences that speak out. So those are just some of the items.
It's interesting to hear a lot of that. It's actually very similar to my experience at a law firm. I have a session on burnout tomorrow that I'm attending that the firm's putting on. So it's great to hear that those are a lot of the policies that you've implemented to make sure and help create and maintain your culture. So I guess pivoting a bit, because the rest of you folks do have in office workforces. So Prem, what has been your experience in terms of your best practices?
We, in the early days, we did split shifts and, so that we could spread out. As we started to accumulate more people, that obviously wasn't possible. But, fortunate enough, we kind of early on decided, we have machinery where we can test ourselves. And then that led to us developing, a high throughput testing system that we offered to now more than 600 schools and businesses across the nation. So our whole motto was really, can we develop a test cheap enough so that everyone can do it at least weekly in-house and feel more comfortable with being there, knowing that some of them do live in multi-generational houses, some of them do travel, in the subway and other places. What we did was, once we started actually catching cases in our own office, we just stepped it up to every day. So we have, we're doing every other day, then every day. So we have a policy where everybody, on their own regard, just submits samples, anonymously submits them in, and then we're able to track them down if necessary. But we do a screening pool testing so that we're able to test everybody. I have to say, with COVID testing, and we do have a pretty strict PPE policy in the lab, but we haven't had a single case where we can actually trace back to, handling COVID samples or something, and actually anything that has spread within the lab. And I think from monitoring long-term, over time, CT values of people we have caught in our own workforce, our practice has been able to catch people early, even when people are not masked, people are not, they haven't spread it throughout the office. And so we catch them at such an early stage that, we can feel very confident about, okay, let's just test everyone the next day and monitor closely, and then bring them all back in. Through the pandemic, and even in the high times and peak periods, it has allowed us to actually have, a work retreat, to actually do things together, and it was so necessary. I think we found in the height of the pandemic for people to come together, to have a work drink, to feel and eat together, and to, during this very, very challenging time. And I think without the testing, it would have been more difficult, because we all do work so close together. Technicians are arm to arm, and it allowed a sense of normalcy. And now people, because it's such an easy test, it's spit in a tube, you're done. It takes you 30 seconds of your day. They can really take off the masks and feel normal, combined with, increased vaccination and so forth. So we have this practice now that I think nobody wants to get rid of, just because it provides that extra sense of security.
That is fascinating. I don't even remember what a work drink feels like at this point. So that's the piece that I took home from that. Regina, what has been your experience with your best practices thus far?
Yeah, so we're probably on the other side of it, where we've taken a more conservative approach. We returned our lab employees back to the lab last July. And prior to that, their desk space was very close in a like a bullpen area. So the first thing that we needed to do was just really spread them out. And so We bought plexiglass dividers. We used a common space where we could set up their own desk and their own area where they could sit and work on their laptop or eat, and just have like that private area that they felt comfortable in. Our biggest challenge, of course, early on, last April and May, was finding PPE. So we needed to find PPE for the New York City office, but also for our field folks as well. So that was a challenge which we were able to overcome. We were able to, so we have masks and face shields and gloves, hand sanitizer that we've provided to everyone. My folks are very much, some of them are double masked with a face shield on. Right now, they're still wearing masks within our suite. And that's the comfort zone of my folks. In September, we opened it up and said that if anyone else wanted to come in to the office, they could. And I think there's maybe 5-6 people that come in, maybe 1, 2, 3 days a week. And the common thing with all of them is that they live in the city, they live in small apartments with small children or roommates, and they just want to be able to get out. We had put our own health and safety guidelines together. And so in order to come back, everyone needed to read the health and safety guidelines. They needed to attend a health and safety training session with one of our physicians on staff. And then they signed an acknowledgement that basically said, that listed out, different criteria that if they were feeling sick, if they had a temperature, any of these things, that they wouldn't come into the office that day. If someone was feeling ill, we asked them to go get tested before they would come back into the office. If someone in their household was ill or had COVID, we made that decision whether or not to have them stay home for a period of time. And so that's really, I think that really helped us. But we have kept them spaced out, and that made them. We also got disposable lab coats for them. So we wanted to make sure that they felt very comfortable. The other big issue for the challenge in the city is, of course, traveling on mass transit. So one of the things that we also decided to do for the lab employees who needed to come in was we told them to calculate what their current commute was using mass transit, and then what it would be if they were driving. And so we made up that difference, and we asked everyone to drive in, use the parking garage. If they didn't have a car, they could Uber in. And we've been making up that difference in commuting costs for the folks who absolutely have to go into the office. We've just recently loosened that. So some people said, want to be able to get back on the train. I feel comfortable with that. So if they feel comfortable with that, they can use mass transit again. If they don't, then we're still making up that difference for those folks. And we just felt that that was an extra layer to help them feel comfortable coming into that, because they came back last July when it was pretty early on.
Yeah, that's super interesting that it is the complete opposite spectrum of what Prem is dealing with. But both are very similar situations to, I think, what everybody's going through right now. So Ben, I'm curious what your experience has been.
Absolutely. So I think we're kind of more of a hybrid maybe between Prem and Regina. Obviously, like all of our companies, it being in biotech, a bulk of your employees kind of need to be in your space to work. People don't have fume hoods and biosafety cabinets at home. And we've done a lot. Obviously, it's been almost a year and a half now. So if I talked about everything, it'd probably take the full hour. But painting in broad kind of strokes, we went through a multi-phase approach to reopening. We actually only really shut down for 2 weeks early in March last year. Then we kind of started bringing lab employees only back in. Phase 1 was we created these huge zones in the lab. Only 5 people were allowed in the lab at a time. It was extremely scheduled. We did that for a while. Then we moved into shifts, kind of like what Prem did. The benefit of that, obviously, being able to spread people out. We alternated benches, alternated desks. But people kind of got fairly comfortable. And I think a lot of that was we worked very closely with Alexandria, who was our landlord, and we actually discovered the being in a lab building, the air in our space actually turns over every 7 to 8 minutes, and so even with wearing the mask, we were just constantly breathing fresh air, and as a result, we actually, similar to Prem, have never had, we've had a few cases, but never any spread, at work between employees. It's always traced back to some exposure out. We quickly moved from shifts into what we called flexible shifts. We left it up to zone captains to determine if there was enough spacing. And now we've actually had our lab employees basically fully back in the lab pretty much for the last maybe 6 or 7 months. And we've now started to welcome back our non-lab employees. I think if I had to identify a few key things that really allowed us to do that, 2 big buckets really exist. First was making sure our employees felt safe at all times. We did a lot of things to do that. I had bi-weekly Zooms that anyone could join to bring up issues, suggestions, things they noticed. We acted as fast as we could to show that we were responsive to their concerns. Similar to what Regina mentioned, obviously New York City presents a unique challenge in that most of our employees did take public transportation usually into work. So for actually early in the pandemic, April, May, we actually ran charter buses. It was kind of like our own little version of school buses through Brooklyn and Queens and New Jersey, and picked up employees and actually brought them in. We've since opened up to public transportation. And then I think the other thing, and I think Amy, you mentioned this, was having events to make people connect. And Prem, you mentioned the happy hours, connect more than just, oh, I came into the lab, I did what I needed to do and leave, because you're going to totally lose, that sense of team. And so even throughout the whole pandemic, we've constantly thought of ways to get people out of work. Early on, that was virtual happy hours. I did something called the Kallyope newspaper. Every day I just send out funny thoughts. People would send me funny stories. And we've actually brought in-person happy hours back as soon as we could. We actually started them late last summer, paused a little bit over the winter, but I've started them back up. And one of the benefits, again, of where we are is we have this wonderful outdoor space that we can take advantage of. And I'm actually very happy to say that as of last week, 99.5% of our team is actually fully vaccinated. And so if people are comfortable, they actually don't have to wear a mask anywhere in our space. Obviously, we're not forcing people to take masks off, but if they want, they can take it off. And then the last thing I'll add, similar to Prem, was just testing. We were very lucky that ARI brought in weekly testing for us. We've not forced employees to do it, but really, really strongly encouraged employees to do it. And I think, again, similar to Prem's experience, it made people feel very comfortable knowing that a majority of people were being tested every week, and that we would hopefully catch something early if something did happen.
Thank you. And Gitte, what's your experience then?
So when this started, we were actually a fairly small team, and we very quickly said anybody who's not necessary in the wet lab, stay home and work from home. We implemented daily stand-ups to make sure everybody was still connected as a team. Less happy hours, more work actually, because we quickly ended up having to do a lot of things in order to scale up our testing. We had a little bit of scare. Our laboratory is in Boston, and we didn't know how long time. Everything was shut down in March and some of April, so it took a little time before we could get scheduled for clear inspection, and we were afraid there was a couple of shutdown mandates from Baker, where we had to work with our in this shared lab space to make sure that they didn't shut us down because we were doing COVID testing. So it's been exciting throughout the whole process. We haven't had a single case. We implemented very early on that everybody should wear a mask. We do have people commuting. Actually didn't think about what Regina just shared with subsidizing transportation. And so we did have some employees that were taking public transportation. So I think this is great. We learn from each other, and I think there's big books that could be written about all that experience. Because we're doing COVID testing, and because we ended up working with Mass Task Force, which is part of FEMA, And we opened the lab at the, inhumane hours to get their first responders tested before they flew to California for the wildfires, and down to New Orleans when they had I think it's hurricane. They offered, because they first responders get vaccinated. We got already the whole lab vaccinated in February. So since then, I've we don't make anything mandated. You obviously shouldn't have to wear masks, but we're still working with samples that are infected, and I don't think we really where we want to completely leave our guards down. There's new variants out there, but we feel much more comfortable now because we got vaccinated than we did in the beginning of the pandemic. We were a little concerned about how that whole thing would go down.
It's been, you almost forget what that was like when this first happened.
Yeah.
I actually am sitting, well, in the office, right? The Boston office, but I work with a number of biotech companies out of New York. And that was a very strange time in the beginning when we had all of these different shutdown rules across the country. And there were very gray areas when it came to biotech, because you might have fit into a category, you might have not.
Yeah.
And so, I know our firm did a lot of work trying to help people figure out if they met one of the exemptions or not, and what that meant. Did their employees have to carry a card, right? It was a strange time. So, so Ben, I do have a question for you from the audience. Were your employees open to disclosing vaccination status, or was it a requirement?
So it was not a requirement. Kind of back in February and March, when people in New York, New Jersey on our team started to become eligible for vaccines, we knew it would be one of the tools that would really allow us to go back to whatever the new normal is. And so we just started asking. And I did work with our legal team. Someone says I choose not to get vaccinated for a religious or a disability reason. Obviously, you can't press more on that. But it was actually, I found very useful, because a lot of people are like, well, it's just really confusing how I go about making an appointment. And then, we could help them. And I think that really actually helped more of our team get vaccinated, because as we all know, now it's very easy. Every day I walk through Grand Central and you can get free train tickets or free Yankee tickets to go get your vaccine. But in the early days, there was, all these different apps and Twitter feeds and all sorts of stuff to find appointments. And, probably 50% of the people were too overwhelmed to find an appointment, and we were able to help them. But yeah, we didn't require people to tell me, but most people, kind of became almost a fun game, I would say. A lot of the research associates went off together and did it. It was it was fun. So it was a little bit of a competition to see who could get it first too. But
I like that. And actually, so a similar question for the rest of the group as well. Have you had any situations where one or more employees has taken a stance that they're just not willing to come back to the office? Either they're not comfortable with it, they don't want to get vaccinated, they don't want to get tested, right? Have you had any circumstance like that where an employee just, for whatever reason, just refuses or doesn't feel comfortable? And if that happens, how did you deal with something like that? So let's start with Gitte, because you may have dealt with this, having dealt with COVID samples, because that's probably one of the scarier examples.
Yeah. I have to say that everybody was, when we started hiring, the first thing we told them was what we were doing, because we knew that would be people who wouldn't feel comfortable. And most of the people, except for my co-founder, are fairly young and outside of the risk group. So, we haven't had anybody who, said we don't feel comfortable. And in fact, we had somebody come on board getting pregnant, and I had my own concern about that. But she decided that she wanted to get vaccinated and felt safe that way. And I can happily announce that she just gave birth to her baby this morning. So everything went well. Yes, we're very happy about that. Yeah. So we haven't had that, but also one of the things that I know I'm missing, because I'm actually not in the lab and not allowed. My co-founder kicked me out because I haven't been in the lab for 20 years. I have opinions about what's going on in the lab, but that's it. But I used to go and meet a lot of people, and both in terms of fundraising and business development. And I would say personally, I struggled with connecting to people just using Zoom. And we had to go out, and this is also a question for Prem, because it's amazing. You go out, you are in this situation, and the normal operating way to get new customers is to go meet them and discuss terms and all that. And everything had to happen over email and Zoom. So, you know, on a very personal level, I actually miss getting in front of people and meeting new people. It's impossible to get quite the same feeling when you sit on Zoom. Zoom is, I think we all learned that Zoom is good for certain things, and maybe, you know, initial stages and follow-up meetings. It's better to also have the opportunity to see people. There's definitely more information there, but it doesn't substitute real physical sit-down meetings. Not in my view.
Yeah, I tend to agree. A lot of my business is trying to meet people in person, and there's been none of that. So it's been very strange. Prem, I'm curious what your experience has been. Have you had any, you have a different circumstance, right? You're testing. So have you had any issues with employees who just did not feel comfortable with the office, the testing, all the protocols, things along those lines?
No, absolutely not. Everyone was super excited to come in, and actually space became a problem of trying to find more and more space as we, you know, almost triple, quadrupled in size, you know, and so we don't even have, you know, enough space for people to sit. So sometimes we're saying, no, some people should work remotely, but you know, I think the biggest thing I missed was the conferences, right? Having virtual conferences just do not do it. You cannot connect as, you know, with someone about their research or, you know, their presentation as easily. And a lot of like our business and partnerships come through those conversations. And also I think in hiring some of the, you know, fresh postdocs coming out, right? You see their posters, you see how they present, you get a different idea of who they are at a conference or something, you know, out there. So I think scouting for the new hires has been extremely challenging during a time of lower conference. Well, I would say I have not attended many virtual conferences because they're not that fun. So that has been, you know, one of the major challenges, I would say.
Regina, have you had any experiences with employees who just didn't want to?
Yeah, we haven't. You know, we are not requiring people to get vaccinated. We're also not asking. That's our stance right now, anyway. We haven't had anyone who, a lot of people are volunteering, but we're not tracking it, of course. Our position will be that if, you know, a person comes forward and says that they can't or won't get vaccinated for either a religious or a medical reason, then we'll kind of deal with that issue when we get to it. We anticipate with a field sales force that we may get that situation, and, you know, also have the situation where a healthcare provider office is requiring vaccinations for people to come in. So, you know, that's a challenge that we haven't had to face yet, but we anticipate facing. But so far, our New York City office employees, who are right now are predominantly lab employees, no one has had any issues with going in and the vaccination.
So Amy, you're in the midst of planning for back to the office. Have you gotten questions about this from employees who are wondering, are you going to mandate? Are you not going to mandate? How are you going to ask? Are you going to ask?
So we are, as of this moment, we're not going to mandate, but we've surveyed so much that we know, I think something like 95% of the employees said yes to get the vaccination. So I think it's probably a small population that won't.
I am so excited to live in Hawaii after 2025.
I have an event coming up next week, and we decided to send out a self checklist asking people if they were vaccinated or not. And as of right now, everybody's been vaccinated. We're still getting some of that information in, and for those that aren't, we are still going to allow them to attend the event, but we'll ask them to, it's an outdoor event, so we'll ask them though to continue to socially distance and wear masks. I think for me, the challenge, and I know Regina and I have spoken about this sort of separately, but I think one of the challenges is, separating out people who aren't vaccinated and how is that going to make them feel. They're going to have to continue to wear the masks and what have you, and how does that make the other employees feel who are in the office? So I think there are going to be challenges around that, having them feel sort of outcasted, and I don't know how we're going to handle that yet. But we are intending to have a very quick schedule when we go back, so we're not intending on having everybody in the office every day at the same time, 5 days a week. So I think that'll probably help as well. And we're also of the opinion that as people continue to get vaccinated and people feel more safe, the increase of people getting vaccinated will probably, the amount of people getting vaccinated will probably increase.
It's so interesting that the shift in concerns these days, right? I attended a farmer's market in Vermont where I've been living for a while, and I'm fully vaccinated. My husband's fully vaccinated, but I have a 2.5-year-old. And we weren't sure, mask, no mask. We don't have to wear them, but should we wear them? Does that indicate that we're not vaccinated, right? I had this very bizarre conversation about all of this. Who would have thought that this is where we would be 15 months later, outdoors at an event, but here we are. So I do have a couple more questions that have come in. There's an interesting one that sort of deals with the forward-looking back to work, right? So this is the second half of our sort of plan questions was, what's the plan, right? Like, how are you dealing with the new normal? How's your company handling or has handled the challenges of getting back into the office? And one question in particular that was asked is, how are you approaching handling unvaccinated employees who work on site? Because there are folks who, due to allergies or religious reasons or things like that, may not, in fact, be able to be vaccinated. And so I guess this is a twofold question in a way. Number one, what are you physically doing? And number two, what are you doing to sort of signal to the employees that you're protecting them, right? I mean, Ben, I know that you mentioned talking about the airflow and the air exchange and things like that. Are you messaging things like that now that people are starting to take the masks off, right? And your full workforce is coming back to the office. So maybe I'll start with you and see how you're dealing with this going forward.
Yeah, no, great question. So, I think our new normal, I'll talk a little bit about, where we're going to do going forward too, just with our employees is, pre-COVID Kallyope, we were 100% in person every day. We never had Zoom. Everyone came every day. Obviously, life is different for everyone now. People have gotten used a little bit to working from home. And so our policy as of, also the beginning of June is all of our lab employees are expected to be there for their full work week. An occasional work from day home with approval of their manager is totally okay. And then for our non-lab based employees, our data science team, our clinical team, our preclinical development team, we still think in-person interaction, the spontaneity, especially in science, is really important. And so we do encourage them to come at least once or twice a week, but we're really leaving it up to the individual teams to kind of map out their own plan. And we'll just continue to monitor it as we get through the summer and fall and see what changes we need to make. But in terms of signaling safety, I think, and this kind of goes back to your earlier question of did we have any resistance? I think because we've had our staff back actually in the lab now for, going on a year, it feels like at this point, I think people it feels very almost normal for us already. And so early on, we obviously stressed safety and all the things we were doing and the transportation. We even brought lunch in for everyone super early in. But now I think people it actually feels great to be at work and be around people. But to the point of, for unvaccinated people, our current policy is, yes, they have to wear a mask. I think it doesn't signal people out because even though we say vaccinated people don't have to wear masks, there's still a group of people who I know are vaccinated who still choose to wear masks. So, it's not like there's just one person, with a scarlet letter, for example, or something. But I think we'll just continue to monitor, obviously, the CDC guidance and the city's guidance on how going forward, and obviously what the caseload around the nation is. We'll adapt and handle that. But for now, if you choose not to get vaccinated, you will continue to wear a mask for the foreseeable future.
Regina, I'm curious how you're dealing with this, both in terms of the signaling and then the actual going forward expectations.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, our stance right now is everyone within our suites are still continuing to wear masks. And that is really the comfort level of the individuals that we have back in the office. So anybody who's back there wants to continue to wear that. So we're going to keep that for now. We'll continue to monitor the situation. We do have, like I said, a couple other employees that are non-lab employees that are back. We are taking, an approach really keeping our eye on the situation and probably looking at, returning people somewhere in the fall to early 2022 timeframe. Whether or not that, and it probably is a phased approach where, we had previously been for non-lab employees 4 days a week, and everyone was remote on Fridays. So just trying to determine what the new normal looks like. We've continued hiring, which is the great news over the pandemic. So when we do go back, we need to find, places and homes for all of the new employees. And so we need to, take that into consideration as well. So right now, continuing to wear masks, continuing to look at it, and, things change so quickly. And so, it's such a fluid situation that we recognize that, even with a return to work in the fall or early 2022, things could have changed for everybody by then. So kind of keeping our options open right now.
Goodwin actually has a very similar circumstance. Our offices in the US are reopening September 13th and encouraging people to come in at least 3 days a week, with the understanding that obviously people don't feel comfortable, they don't feel comfortable. So it's been an interesting process. Prem, I'm guessing you have a slightly different experience, right? Because you've already started taking the mask off, but maybe that's because you have COVID testing. And so if people are unvaccinated, they don't have that level of fear, perhaps? I don't know. What's your experience been?
We've learned a lot just from testing. I think we've done more than almost close to 1.7 million tests now. I've been following the data pretty closely. Wow. What's funny is there was a school that we were testing for, and one of the outbreaks that we had caught for them was actually in an office building. And after doing smoke detection, and looking at the ventilation, they actually found that putting up the plexiglass caused the lack of ventilation and probably caused and led to the outbreak within this office. So in some cases, trying to actually put up barriers can be worse off because it doesn't allow the air to flow properly. So these are some of the things we've learned. And I think just kind of taking our knowledge and everything we've learned from, where outbreaks occur, how they happen, and what we've seen, the data really helps us and everyone feel comfortable. And I think that's where, we take the approach of, as the more data that we can have, the better we feel, especially as scientists, right? And so as rates go down, but variants come up and, things are trickling around in certain areas, popping up in Southeast Asia, popping over now to the UK, we will continue, regardless of vaccination status, to do aggressive testing to potentially catch, are there variants, are there breakthrough cases, within our own workforce as well. So we have seen, I think, probably a good number of breakthrough cases. And what's surprising to us is that it's not just that, okay, they have very low viral loads and they can't infect others. They actually, in many cases, do have very high viral loads, but they're not hospitalized, they're not sick, they don't have any symptoms. But because they have very high viral loads, they are probably gaining more mutations, as they're replicating, and probably in a state where they can further create vaccine resistant strains. That's what kind of worries us. as we've seen this. And I think we follow closely, like, what happened with the Yankees and the value, the CT values that were popping around through the 9 Yankees that were infected. And they actually did have very high viral loads, at least about 7 of them did. So safety for us and making everyone feel at ease is just, again, continued testing, because regardless of, as the CDC and everyone says, okay, testing's not needed for vaccinated people, we're not going to understand if something pops up unless we do aggressive testing. So that's the, where we encourage, our own staff, hey, you know what, if something does happen, let's find it first, and because we are testing a lot of the now public schools, that have the funding to do so, I think this is where we will find, anything that may pop up and prevent further spread before it can become an outbreak. That's our main goal of safety, is that yes, we may find a case here and there, but we will prevent that from going elsewhere.
So I'm curious, knowledge is power, right? So how are you messaging this to your employees, right? As you guys are gaining more knowledge, you've got this wide swath of testing data and you've got all of these experiences over the last 15 months. How do you present that to your employees to make them feel more comfortable?
Well, from all the school data, we know that most of the actual spread occurs at home. It occurs when the masks are off, when you're eating, usually around the table. That is probably the highest rate of transmission right there, is just congregating to enjoy a beverage, enjoy a meal. In fact, all of the schools that we have surveyed, there was rarely any in-school transmission. It was the fact of taking a school break. So the 3-day, 3-day, 4-day, anytime there's more than a 3-day period, rates would go up when school was out of session because they went home, right? And so actually some of the schools adjusted their policies to have a break on Wednesdays so that they wouldn't, people wouldn't go away. They wouldn't have these long holidays. So those were the time periods when the rates went up. I think now as everything's reopening, bars, restaurants, and we want people to feel a sense of normality, it's just going to be now a potential for any day, right? Or any kind of, every day is a holiday, I guess. So things can spread. But those were the things that we learned, and in hindsight, it seems almost instantaneously that the moment, New York City shut the schools down and people went home, 2 to 3 weeks later was the humongous uptick in cases and hospitalizations, right? And so hindsight is always easy to say, but the data and having tested schools very aggressively allows us to draw that definitive conclusion now, that we wouldn't have been able to say that had we not had that data.
That's so interesting. It supports my bubble theory. I'm just staying in my bubble at this point. So Amy, I have a somewhat similar question for you. So as someone who's been away from the office and your employees have been away from the office while you're growing this business, how much of the back to work sort of culture is going to be driven from the top down, right? So how do you have this discussion with your employees? You've been doing all of this work all along, trying to build this up. So now that circumstances are changing, how do you deal with this going forward?
So, well, first thing we're doing is we're actually calling it back to the office. Because
we've been working this whole time, to be clear, right?
We've gotten some feedback that when we call it that, it's acting like they've been on vacation for a year, which they haven't been. And I've done it too. I say back to work all the time. I have to correct myself. But in any event, I think sort of different from maybe some of the folks on the phone. We're trying something new going forward. We're not going to require people to go back in 5 days a week. Most likely it'll be 2 days a week, 3 days at home. We're not going back until January. From now until January, our intent is to do small meetings, whether it's, doing an offsite day like we're doing next week, or, just having a couple of in-person meetings. We're going to try to work more virtually in the future. I do think, though, that there's, I think to everybody's point, I think you have value in seeing people in person. But we've been really effective working at home. We're in the process of enrolling a phase 3 trial, almost complete. or be complete somewhat soon, and we've done that successfully. So, you know, it's kind of a hard argument to say that you have to go back and see each other 5 days a week, and you know, people have really, I think in the beginning people were like, we have to go back in the office and see people, and then I think we went through a lull where people were saying, you know, this is great. You know, we have quality of life back. For many of us, you know, there was probably an hour and a half commute each way, so you've gotten 3 hours back of your. So for us, I think flexibility is going to be key. We're going to create a remote work policy. We're actually not even going to call it a policy, we're going to call it guidelines, so that people are aware that we're being flexible. And we're actually downsizing our footprint and are going on, and that just coincided with the lease being up. So we're going to downsize our footprint and have it so that people can you know, come into the office, and they won't necessarily have an office. They may have a cube or conference room space to be able to do their job. And we're going to see how it goes. You know, I don't know that we're committed to any one way. You know, maybe we'll go back and say we need more time. Maybe we'll go back and say, hey, we don't even need space anymore. We can operate virtually. But we've also been sensitive, I think, too, to a lot of the articles that have come out about how, you know, and I'm sure everybody here is aware, you know, people are saying, I don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. I want to live anywhere and be able to, you know, do my job. And so we're trying to be sensitive to that as well. But I think balance, you know, having some in-person time. And I think, you know, for people on the phone that have labs, I think that complicates it. I don't think you're able to do that, right? So we're lucky enough that we're able to do that. And when we do open a small lab, those people will not be able to participate in working from home because they have to be in the lab. So
it's a unique asset class that has to have some folks in the office and perhaps doesn't have to have some folks in the office, which unfortunately means that you may have to have a bifurcated set of guidelines, right? Better or worse. Right. So I'm curious along those lines, Regina, so when you have new hires, for example, how do you communicate this with them, right? So how do you explain to them what the thought process is going forward, you know, COVID precautions, the ethos of the business, right? Like how do you deal with this going forward?
Yeah, so we have onboarded people into the labs, and obviously for those interviews, they actually went right in person. And they had been working, their work environment that they came from was in person. So that wasn't that big of a stretch for them. The folks who would normally work in the New York City office, but are currently remote, we have, you know, during the interview process, we've been communicating to them that we're very much looking at the situation, and that, you know, we anticipate that, you know, we communicate pretty far ahead. So we communicate, you know, anywhere from 4 to 6 months ahead to say, to let people know that, you know, we're not going to be going back. We're not going to just, you know, pull the rug from under them and say you have to go back in 2 weeks, because we do recognize that people have, whether it's childcare considerations or even just their own mental health, needing to start to make that start to process, you know, going back into the office. You know, when you go on vacation for a week or two, that Sunday night before you go back, you know, a lot of times you're like, oh my gosh, I have to go back. So, you know, picture what it's going to be like when you haven't been in the office in 18 months. So we recognize that, of course. We have been onboarding everyone virtually. So we have virtual orientation, and, you know, that's really how we've been working, and we've been letting them know that we don't have any decision as to when we go back. You know, like Amy, we anticipate, at least in the beginning, that it's going to be a 2 to 3 day event. And we're also watching to, you know, we're seeing and a lot of articles too on just the competitive edge. So for the companies that are going to require non-lab based employees to go back 5 days a week, you know, what are the implications of that? Because then on the other hand, you have companies that are saying you can work remotely all 5 days, you know, 100%. So, you know, we'll probably strike a balance somewhere in the middle. But, you know, we're just kind of keeping an eye on things and, making decisions as more information becomes available.
So Gitte, I'm curious about your experience on that as well. Obviously, you're in a couple different markets, both in Boston and New York. Is that also your thought process? Because those are very competitive markets for employees.
Yeah. So, we already had a level of flexibility implemented prior to COVID because of we had a programming team that was virtual, and nothing changed for them. They're located all over the planet, South America, Europe, and China. So, nothing have changed for them. We did have a more like a bioinformatics team where it was more important that they were closer to the wet lab for next-gen sequencing, and that team will probably have to go back in the office, although they're technically completely capable of working remote. But this lack of connectivity between the two very important departments that really rely a lot on each other is not optimal. At this point of time, again, everybody got vaccinated, and I hear what Prem is saying. We really need to continue to test as we are. But the fact that we are, everybody got vaccinated gives us a little bit more higher level of comfort. And we haven't had anybody who did not want to get vaccinated. We built a back-end platform for our customers. Our customers have kept its manufacturing 3-shift kind of stuff, where we were able to identify, and I think you're absolutely right, Prem, the infection happens outside the workspace because everybody's wearing masks at work, but not at home. And we would have these shifts come in and be positive, individuals in the shift be positive, we're able to stop them in the tracks and say, these guys need to stay home and get tested again and quarantine for a while. And we also know that there are breakthrough cases. We have one investor whose husband is an older gentleman, and he was fully vaccinated, got upper respiratory illness, got hospitalized, and they didn't test him for COVID. So I just want to, and he had COVID, and he's really got very, very sick because he wasn't being treated for COVID. So I just want to, I don't want to cause any alarm because again, we are feeling more comfortable because we've got vaccinated, but it's not the right time to completely let go of all the guards. We don't know exactly how protected we are with the vaccine and some of these new variants. And as Prem can testify, we also know through Saliva Direct that we collaborate with, we have these breakthrough cases. And the theory was that they were not infectious, but with the CT value, which is basically correlating with viral titers, they're definitely infectious. So we're not quite where we can totally relax yet. So I will urge everybody who does think through, does bring people back and want to make them feel safe, to talk to Prem or I. We know how to keep you safe. And I want to add one more thing, because I by the way, spend a lot of time over in Vermont because they did a great job. And my son is at the University of Vermont. So we literally skied between Thanksgiving and mid-January when they went back. He was very happy about that. They had an infection rate at UVM. They tested every second week. They tested them before they showed up of 0.3%, where the state had a 3% infection rate at the same time. So I'm just saying that testing, it's very well documented that testing and detection of infections early quarantining, and all the measures works. So I would urge people to think through that. And last thing again, I'm wearing mask even though I'm infected outside, and I'm doing it because I don't want other people to feel uncomfortable. And until everybody's done with vaccination, I think I'm going to keep it on.
Well, I think that is the perfect way to end. And Vermont just hit 80% of vaccination rate as a state very recently. And so we're very, very proud of all the folks here. So I hope that all of the good work that you guys are doing now continues, because this has been just so amazing to hear from all of you and what you're doing and how you're dealing with all of this, both backwards looking and forwards looking. So this has been super fascinating. So Jennifer, I will let you wrap it up for us.
Thank you. I'm like magic. I reappear at the very end. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole, for moderating, and thank you to each of our panelists. I think it was amazing to be able to hear, I mean, how similar and yet sort of specific for your employee base that you're drilling down to that sort of individual level. And that's going to be very helpful to those that were listening today and those that will listen on YouTube as they're planning their own return to the office plans for their specific employees. Thank you. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for engaging with our New York Bio community. And we hope to see you all at another event soon. All right, take care,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for being on the
Bye.
call. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on New York Bio's Back to the Office series. For more from New York Bio, follow us on Twitter @NewYorkBio and check out our website at www.newyorkbio.org.